Back on Morning Line, thanks for joining us. Our guest this morning is News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo, who is now growing a beard, and I understand his daughter's there probably making him some toast.
I wish she was. It's hard to find good help nowadays, Nick, during this coronavirus.
Well, I know you're at home. I like the beard. Anyway, good to have you on, Nick.
It's going to be gone here shortly, but, you know, I haven't had a haircut in 90 days either. You know how it goes.
Yeah, I hear you. Listen, we're going to get into more of the details, but we have a phone call or two for you that will jump in that waited through the break, Nick, and we'll go to John and see what his question is. Go ahead, John. Are you there? Hi, John. Hey, go ahead. What's your question, John?
Do you think it's been a pretty big mistake since January and February, where average citizens weren't covering up with masks and gloves to protect themselves?
Okay, in terms of, well, he may be, piggybacking off what you said in the last segment, just about maybe some of the basis for the lawsuit, and maybe more people could have been doing things earlier that would have been better than shutting down all the businesses and the like. Everyone wishes we could have been on top of this sooner, but a lot of times you don't know exactly what you're dealing with right off the bat. So what do you think, Nick?
Well, and I think, John raises a good point. Would that have been another avenue to take? And I think, there's something to be said for that. But what we have to remember, too, is what we're trying to do is change human behavior. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And we see now, even today, we have these orders about wearing masks in Davidson County. And if you go to certain parts of the county, people aren't wearing masks. So I do think that taking all the precautions that you can with PPE is what needs to be done to help lessen the spread of this virus. And again, I don't think, like Nick said, I don't think we necessarily knew exactly what we were dealing with. We hadn't really seen anything like this. But again, they're not really enforcing it right now. I mean, I think, if the police were to enforce wearing a mask, as long as they provided someone with a mask, and if that person declined to put that on, then there may be a citation to be issued. But I do think it's important to follow the directives from the CDC, as well as, the governor and the mayor when it comes to personal protective equipment.
Wanted to ask you about this story that, we've been following, and it deals with the fact that things are reopening right now, Nick. And as they do, we see more and more businesses or, places like, be it doctors' offices, maybe swimming pools, gyms, and this is nationwide, not just here in Middle Tennessee, asking perhaps their customers to sign waivers that would protect the facility from liability should they come down with COVID-19. And, when I first saw that, I go, well, how the heck are you going to be able to prove that you were exposed to COVID-19, say at a gymnasium, as opposed to maybe somewhere else? So I don't know how effective that is, but we've seen cases now of some of the contracts that you sign when you join anything along those lines, and you sign it in the small print. Now it also includes protection against liability for the coronavirus. What do you think about that?
Well, I think generally waivers like that are not really favored under Tennessee law, but they can be enforceable, but they're not enforceable as it pertains to gross negligence, okay? And so if an establishment is grossly negligent, then that's a little bit different. I don't think that's covered by the waiver. But yet, again, what's important with this waiver is that if the person who executed the waiver by going into a gym or going into a restaurant, if they believe the waiver is valid, well, that very much so, goes to exactly what the establishment was trying to do, and that was to prevent litigation. But we're seeing this in a lot of the nursing home cases, and I don't think that coronavirus necessarily spreads absent sort of negligence. And so, it could be enforceable, but again, if they are grossly negligent, the establishment is, they're still not going to be protected by that waiver, absent some new legislation from the General Assembly or the United States Congress.
Okay, now if there is a waiver that's presented to you when you're going to one of these places and you choose not to sign it, I imagine the establishment then would have the right to deny, you coming in or joining, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, one of the premier examples we have in the state of Tennessee is whitewater rafting. Okay,
yeah.
If you don't sign that waiver, they're not going to take you on a trip down the Ocoee. But in addition to these waivers, there is legislation from the General Assembly that says that whitewater rafting companies are not liable. And so, again, that's a specially carved out legislative exception that helps the industry, the tourism industry. And we see that quite a bit on those kinds of issues. But yes, if you wouldn't sign that, then they could deny you entrance to that place no matter what.
Curious. And that's interesting about whitewater. I don't know if that's one of only the handful of exceptions, but gross negligence comes into play. I imagine if you sign that waiver and you're a first timer, you don't really know, and you get onto one of those whitewater rafts and for some reason they do not give you a life vest and you fall in and drown, I don't care what that waiver says. I'm suing them because they did that I consider criminal if they're not giving you a life vest when they're supposed to. I'm just curious, would they still be protected under that circumstance?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's gross negligence. I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. People fall out of those rafts all the time. Someone falls out of a raft, they had on a life jacket, and they die. I don't think that they're liable. But I do think if they don't provide a PFD or a personal flotation device or do any sort of, go over and do their little spiel before everyone gets in the boat, then I do think that they could potentially be liable. But again, it has a lot. If that set of facts gets to a jury, then the jury's going to be the one to determine that. And that brings us kind of full circle back to what you were discussing earlier on this gavel to gavel trials. Right now, the Supreme Court has said there's not going to be any jury trials through the month of July. So right now we have people that are sitting in jail in Davidson County and all kinds of all over America that can't make bond, who've been sitting there for a year or so, had a trial set, say in April, had a trial set in May, and now that's not going forward. And so there are other people that have trials set in July and August, and so they're going to be bumped on down the way. And so we've got a real issue with how are we going to have a 12-person jury trial. Now, civil cases can have a 6-person jury trial because there's no constitutional right to a 12-person jury trial in a civil case. So I do think that after July, the civil courts may have a 6-person jury because that way they're able to socially distance. But the Birch building and the jury boxes are not set up to socially distance right now. And so I don't know how we have a jury trial in the foreseeable future, and it is a real constitutional crisis. I saw some other states were allowing them to do it via Zoom. I think that's horrible. I don't think that's good at all to do a jury trial with a teleconference. I think that you need to be present, but again, there's no answer for that. So as it pertains to the Delkey case in June, obviously that's not going to be going forward. And I don't know if it's going to go forward in the foreseeable future. We haven't had a grand jury in Davidson County because that issue indictments. And so there's a backlog there. And we just now got enough people to have a grand jury. They volunteered to be on this grand jury. So if we had volunteers, that's one way to get it going. But every Monday, they usually bring a couple of hundred people in to the Birch building, the jury assembly room, and send them up to courtrooms to see if they qualify for juries. And those days are over and anytime in the foreseeable future, and I'm not sure what the answer is.
What's weird is I just hear what you're saying, and I know we're in unprecedented times, but what you've basically said is there are people who are still innocent until proven guilty, some of whom are charged with very serious crimes, but who have been locked up or still have just had this black cloud hanging over their head all this time, and you always hear the right to a quick and speedy trial. Now, it's no one's fault, but there is a constitutional issue here where folks have had their freedoms or liberties taken away when they've been proven guilty of nothing at this point and are still sitting there waiting for their chance, and they're not free. And it's unprecedented. And it's no one's fault. But Nick, is that not a constitutional issue? And I'm not saying because it's a violation and they have a right, you just set them guilt-free. But it's just like, again, unprecedented. It's a bad situation.
Well, it is a constitutional crisis. And the problem is, let's say that we somehow, come up with a vaccine or, being very optimistic, maybe at the beginning of 2021, then there's other people that have trials set then. So there's going to be a backlog in the system, and I don't know how you deal with that. And I still, just like we saw this lawsuit that was filed yesterday, about the governor's closure orders, I do anticipate us seeing a lawsuit from either ACLU or someone else saying, look, I'm innocent until proven guilty. I have a right to a jury trial. I can't make this bond. My trial was set. I'm just sitting here in jail for indefinitely for the foreseeable future. So I know that the DA's office has been working to review every jail case here in Davidson County to say, look, are there people sitting in jail that we can maybe make an offer on that would put them out with probation community corrections or some other supervised form of release. But there are people who are, charged with child sex crimes or murder or attempted murder, in very serious crimes that you may or may not necessarily, they're presumed innocent, but you may not want to give them some sort of deal that puts them on probation, or they may not be eligible for probation with the offenses for which they're charged. So I don't know what the answer is, but it is a constitutional crisis of the highest proportions, and I anticipate seeing some sort of federal lawsuit about that very soon.
Yeah, it's probably going to come. Listen, Nick, we're going to cut you loose now, but you're going to be joining me later today for Ask Nick, and that title applies when you come on to both of us.
That's right. It's you and I have done probably almost 1,000 hours of TV at that desk, and it's a little bit different doing it this way.
It is, but it's still comfortable. You do a terrific job, and I really appreciate you coming on this morning. But we'll see you again around lunchtime, okay, Nick?
All right, see you. Take
All right,
care.
thank you, my friend. Listen, Nick Leonardo, our legal analyst. We'll take a break. When we come back, if you're on hold, stay there. Ann and others, we'll get to some of your calls. Also, I have some new information to share with you right off the bat when we come back in terms of if you're still waiting for that stimulus payment, all right? There's a number and details on where you can go to perhaps finally get some answers and get that money. So I'll have that for you. Any questions on Facebook as well, go ahead and message me now. We'll be right back.